has to do with a secret spot. Since this is an old recollection from childhood, it's a little out of focus in places, but something very much like this happened. I guess I was about 5 years old, and the Second World War hadn't been over for much longer than that. We lived in a big square brick house in a little town in Illinois. My older sister, mother, father, grandmother, and I. We were a standard post-war extended family unit, 3 generations in one house, which was owned and largely run by the oldest, grayest member. The first president I remember was Eisenhower. Ike, a kindly, bald man who fished a lot. And the first thing I remember clearly about him is when he got caught lying about the U-2 spy plane incident. People were genuinely scandalized. Imagine, an elected official lying. I'm only 43 years old now, but those seem like awfully remote times. At the end of the street our house was on, a 30-second bike ride away, was the woods, and a few hundred yards back in there you'd come to the creek. It wasn't much of a creek, but I didn't know that then. It was the only one I'd ever seen. This was the Forest Preserve, a sprawling hardwood boondocks that surrounded the town on all but one side, where the cornfields were. It was state-owned, but the state was not much in evidence. There were no signs telling you what you couldn't do in there, and so by implication at least, you could do what you pleased. There were no marked trails or outhouses, and there were no official access points either. You just stepped into the trees wherever you felt like it. This was just the woods, and we kids were in there all the time. In the summer we were mostly down along the creek fishing. That is, doing what kids do when they say they're fishing. We carried sticks, string, and hooks, and based on some old family photos, we even got into real cane poles at some point. But we caught more frogs and turtles than catfish, and we usually caught them by hand between games of cowboys and Indians. I remember overhearing some adults saying that I was growing up like a wild Indian. I took it as a compliment. There were rules, of course. You could go into the woods, but you couldn't go past the dead tree at the bottom of the hill, and you couldn't cross the creek. The big people laid down these laws, but they didn't bother to give us any good reasons for them, so we decided they were arbitrary and tended to flirt with the boundaries. Once we were down in the woods, it seemed like all bets were off. To avoid getting caught, we developed a minimalist 2-syllable style of testimony. "Where have you been?" "The woods." "How did you get so dirty?" "Fell down." "What were you doing?" "Nothing." "Well, did you boys have fun?" "I guess." The fun business involved some ticklish theology. Grandma was a sweet old lady, but she had a stern side, and she was also deeply religious. She may even qualified as a mystic, because she spoke with, that is, conversed with, the Lord on a daily basis. The two of them pretty much agreed on everything, including the idea that fun was sinful, or maybe that certain kinds of fun were sinful, or maybe it was too much fun. Something like that. I was never clear on the concept then, and still don't entirely understand it. So the wisest course of action with the adults was to downplay enthusiasm, avoid the particulars, and live a kind of secret life. What were we doing at the creek all afternoon? Nothing, which is to say, none of your business. If you think children don't have that kind of self-respect, you've just forgotten. One day we heard from some big kids that there was a secret place to fish way down the creek. Way down. Miles and miles, they said. We listened to this with some interest, since none of us had ever caught a fish longer than 6 inches, and the problem had to be where we were fishing, right? Even today, that's often the problem. There were huge catfish down there that they, of course, caught all the time, and that no one else knew about. We got this.